y'all shit in their pants when we load up. Don't nobody move a muscle, it's a hold up.
Put them in the best position they could be. Even with the dude that was locked up and shit like that.
You know, I mean, we was young. Right. We was all crazy.
The most shocking news of late 2025. Max B, the king of hip-hop, has officially been released from prison after 16 years behind bars. Less than 3 days after regaining his freedom, the name Max B flooded social media. You could barely scroll for a moment without seeing him. Everywhere. Relentless. Haunting. As if Max B had never disappeared. But then one name spoke up, and the atmosphere instantly shifted. Jim Jones. A powerful figure. A shadow permanently tied to Max B's past. According to what has been revealed, Max B is being portrayed as more dangerous than any criminal profile people ever imagined. And Jim Jones is believed to be holding a secret powerful enough to imprison Max B's career one more time. What is really going on? What secret could stop Max B right as the door to freedom has just opened? Do not look away. The truth behind Max B is nothing like any detective film you have ever watched. Harlem, a childhood raised in blood and tears. Max B grew up in the Abraham Lincoln Projects in East Harlem, a public housing complex, where violence and crack were not news, but daily life. Yet this same place also produced hip-hop legends like Big L and Dame Dash. His mother was addicted to crack, and when Max was very young, she was arrested and sentenced to 1.5 years in prison. That meant that from the very beginning of his life, Max learned how to survive without a complete family. Max was mainly raised by his grandparents in a deeply religious household. Going to church sparked his love for music, and he began singing in the boys' choir of Harlem. Being part of the choir taught Max how to sing, and that foundation later shaped Max B's distinctive style when he entered the studio and started rapping. As he got older, Max became a childhood friend of Cameron, a name that would later become a symbol of Harlem. Cameron attended Manhattan Center for Mathematics along with Jim Jones, and that connection brought Max closer to Jim. They met through music, through a shared dream of becoming rappers, but they were also moving within an environment where the streets were never separate from the game. And before any of them had the chance to truly break out, Max B became entangled in a criminal case that sent him to prison, cutting his rap career short before it could properly begin. In 1997, at just 18 years old, Max was arrested for robbery and sentenced to nearly 8 years in prison. That sentence stopped his rap career before it ever had the chance to take off. While Max disappeared behind bars that same year, Cameron and Jim Jones, along with Freaky Zeke, formed Dipset. When Max returned in 2005, the world had changed, the balance of power had already been set, and his story was no longer being told from the starting line. Max wanted to change his life and focus seriously on his music career, so he reconnected with Cam and the Dipset members. He began appearing on multiple collaborations and featured on 2 tracks from Jim Jones's second album, Harlem Diary of a Summer. The following year, Max also sang the hook on Cameron's track You Gotta Love It, a diss aimed at Jay-Z. The bold diss and Max's deep, heavy voice immediately grabbed attention, and suddenly the name Max B was everywhere. That same year, Max released his debut mixtape, $1 Million Baby. Around this time, Jim Jones also launched his own label and satellite group called Bird Gang. Jim invited Max B to join the group, along with another Dipset affiliate, Stack Bundles. As Max's fame continued to rise, his street instincts grew stronger as well. And those instincts pushed him straight into trouble. Trouble big enough to change his life forever. Lifting the Veil, a case file sealed for 19 years. On September 29, 2006, Max was arrested and charged with murder and conspiracy to commit robbery, after police accused him of being the mastermind behind a chaotic robbery that resulted in a fatal outcome. But to understand why that night happened, we have to go back 1 year earlier, when everything was still disguised as love music and seemingly harmless decisions. During that time, Max was involved with his former girlfriend, Gina Conway. She moved in with Max in the Bronx. By day, Gina worked at a strip club. By night, Max was locked in the studio chasing a rap dream he believed would not slip away this time. But the relationship was never healthy. Gina worked in nightlife. Max was no different, changing bed partners as easily as clothes. They fought, broke up, got back together, then fought again. There was no stability, only layers of damage piling up. Eventually, Gina returned to the South, but Max convinced her to come back to New York. And when Gina returned, what she found was not an apology or change, but Max living with another woman who was pregnant with his child. From that moment on, every boundary in the relationship completely collapsed. In a move that defied logic, Gina later moved in with Max's brother Mike while continuing her work as a dancer. The story was already tangled, but that was only the beginning. While working at the club, Gina met Alan J. Plowden. Jay showed up in a new white Mercedes, and the back of the car was often filled with cash. One night after being ignored by Max, Gina struck up a conversation with Jay. They quickly became involved. Jay spent money without hesitation, taking Gina shopping, ordering champagne, buying new clothes, as if money had no value at all. Gina followed Jay to a Holiday Inn hotel, where he was staying with his partner David Taylor. There, Gina discovered that Jay and David were running a mortgage scam and mail fraud operation. That was why cash was scattered all over the hotel room. Gina saw everything. And in that moment, the most dangerous idea took root. Before leaving, she secretly stole Jay's room key card. Gina called Max B. A robbery plan was drawn up. Kelvin Leardom, Max's cousin, was pulled in. On the night of the incident in Fort Lee, Jay and another woman were tied up. The money was less than expected. Gina forced Jay to call David Taylor to come over. When David arrived, the tension spiraled out of control. A gun went off. David Taylor collapsed on the spot. In that instant, a simple robbery turned into a murder case. After that, everything fell apart at the speed of a sentence that seemed pre-written. Gina was the first to be arrested. Under pressure, she broke and confessed to everything. A 169-page statement was submitted to the police, and on every page, Max B was positioned as the mastermind. Max was arrested. Bail was set at $2 million. And in the blink of an eye, the man once seen as the soul of the Harlem Wave was facing the possibility of life in prison. After 10 months in custody, Max finally saw a glimmer of hope. Bail was reduced to $90,000, meaning freedom was just one door away. But he needed someone to step in and help. And at that exact moment, another relationship entered the story, bringing consequences that would prove even more dangerous. Help, or a carefully staged trap. Jim Jones stepped in, but not out of loyalty or brotherhood. Rumors spread throughout Harlem that Jim only agreed to post Max's bail if Max signed over all of his publishing rights and agreed to deliver 6 albums for Bird Gang. It was a trap disguised as a lifeline. Desperate and behind bars, Max had few options left. He signed the papers. In return, Jim gained full control over Max's publishing. Max gained temporary freedom, but his future now belonged to the man he once trusted most. When Max walked out of jail in July of 2007, he began to truly understand the price of the word help. Inside Bird Gang, the structure was clear. Jim was the boss. Artists were assets. But Max was not just rapping a few verses and leaving the studio. He wrote hooks, created melodies, adjusted flows, and helped shape the musical moments that made Jim's songs catchy viral and hit-ready. In Max's mind, he was a creative partner. In Jim's operation, Max was just a controllable worker. That was where the core conflict ignited. Max saw Jim going on shows, saw the real numbers, saw real power. Then he compared it to what he was receiving. According to Max, he was paid around $300 per show, while Jim earned $10,000 to $15,000. Whether accurate or not, those numbers reflected a very real feeling exploitation. And it did not stop there. Jim had beef in multiple cities, and Max was dragged into every one of those conflicts. Jim's rivals would show up at concerts to start trouble throwing chairs onto the stage, and Max would be the one forced to confront them all in exchange for $300. From that moment on, Max B was no longer just a disgruntled artist. He became uncontrollable. He was ready to go to war. So Max decided that if Jim was not going to help him reach the top, he would use the attention by igniting beef. Max knew rap fans loved it, and he began dissing his former brother. After leaving Bird Gang and linking up with French Montana, the two of them launched repeated attacks on Jim Jones. Around that same time, Max B released a mixtape titled Public Domain 3, in which he dissed Jim Jones and the entire Dipset camp. The mixtape cover showed Max B standing in a graveyard surrounded by tombstones reading, "Here lies Millie Jim Jones," and "Here lies Vanilli Joel Santana." Milli Vanilli was a famous pop group from the 1990s that was later exposed for lip-syncing to other people's vocals. Max was implying that Jim Jones and Jules Santana had stolen music from him, and other Bird Gang members then pretended it was their own work. Max B and French Montana also went back and forth with Jim Jones in interviews and videos posted on WorldStar. But Jim was not the only target. Max also began attacking Jim Jones's wife, claiming she had acted inappropriately with him by a pool in Miami. Tensions escalated when in a recent video, Max claimed that Jim Jones saw him sitting in his car and tried to rush him for a fight. Jim allegedly drove over and blocked Max in a parking lot so he could not open his doors. Jim and his associates attempted to attack Max, but Max rammed his car into Jim's Bentley to escape, then punched Jim in the face. In the video, Max even showed the dents on the vehicle and pointed out the exact location where the fight happened. On another occasion, Max B and French Montana brought a large group to confront Jim at a recording studio in Manhattan, but they were stopped in the lobby. As they left the studio, Max and French claimed that Jim, seeing how tense the situation had become, called the police. The beef continued to heat up, and it seemed like only a matter of time before someone was seriously injured or killed. 50 Cent enters the picture. And in that moment, 50 Cent stepped in. Not by accident, not on impulse, but at the right time with the right opponent and the right read of public psychology. For 50 Cent, this was not just Max B's story. It was a new link in a feud that had stretched on for years between him and Jim Jones. A feud that never needed an official declaration, but always smoldered beneath the surface of New York hip-hop. 50 Cent understood one thing very clearly. When Max B had just been released from prison, the dangerous narrative around him had not yet been redefined. It was suspended in mid-air, without a clear shape. And that was the easiest moment to manipulate. Instead of arguing, instead of presenting logic or evidence, 50 chose a far more effective route. He trolled. He laughed. He turned the entire situation into public entertainment. Instagram became the weapon. No rap, no interviews. Just the right image at the right moment, a caption sharp enough with sarcasm, and the rest was left to the crowd. Memes began to appear. Images from the film Belly, a cultural icon of street cinema, were pulled out of their original context and dropped into a new narrative. No explanation needed, just implication. A character glancing sideways, an ambiguous look, a moment familiar to anyone who grew up with New York hip-hop. The caption was just short enough to hint at, drop a dime, a phrase that needs no explanation in street culture. 50 Cent did not name Jim Jones. He did not directly mention Max B. But it was precisely that refusal to name names that made the message clearer. Everyone understood. And once everyone understood, the story was no longer in the hands of the person who started it. The danger here did not lie in the specific content of the meme. It lay in how memes function. An image, a line of text once shared fast enough and wide enough escapes the original intent of the poster. It becomes collective property. Bloggers started writing articles. Fans began creating new variations. Hip-hop pages jumped in, each adding another layer, another angle of mockery. No one verified anything. No one checked context. Everything ran on the logic of entertainment. And within that logic, dangerous stopped being a legal or moral question. It became a punchline. Jim Jones, despite staying silent quickly, became the focal point of ridicule. Not because he did anything new, but because his image was placed inside a frame he could not control. In traditional hip-hop, a rapper can respond with music, with words, with action. But in meme culture, every response risks backfiring. Silence looks like admission. Speaking out becomes fresh material for the next round of mockery. This was a battlefield 50 Cent knew well. He did not need to win with logic. He only needed to make his opponent look awkward in front of the crowd. And while Jim Jones was dragged into the center of the joke, Max B stood somewhere else, somewhere far more dangerous. He was not the one laughing. He was not even the one being laughed at directly. He was the excuse. His existence at that exact moment became the catalyst that made everything explode. The image of Max B Dangerous was recycled not as a warning, but as a curiosity and entertainment hook. This created a chilling paradox. When a human being becomes a meme, right and wrong stop mattering. What matters is reach. The chain reaction moved so fast that no one could stop it. People who had never listened to Max B's music now knew his name through memes. Those who never cared about the long history between Jim Jones and 50 Cent were pulled in as well. The story was retold in the simplest, most digestible way possible. And in that retelling, dangerous became a flexible label. It could be an accusation. It could also be a joke. But in any form, it stuck to Max B. This was the moment when the line between reality and entertainment was completely erased. A personal feud turned into public amusement. A legal story turned into viral content. A flesh and blood human being turned into an image dragged across timelines. 50 Cent did not need to say that Max B or Jim Jones was dangerous. He only needed to create the space for the crowd to repeat the word themselves in their own way, for their own reasons. And once the crowd joined in, no one controlled the direction anymore. Bloggers needed clicks. Hip-hop pages needed engagement. Fans needed entertainment. Every share bent the story a little further. Jim Jones became the object of ridicule. Max B remained the spark. One was laughed at. One was labeled. Neither truly held control. At this point, the question was no longer who was right or wrong or who was truly dangerous. The question shifted to a colder, more uncomfortable level. If a meme is powerful enough to flip public perception to turn a person into a symbol of danger, with just a few taps on a screen, then who is really dangerous in this story? The one being labeled, or the system that turns every tragedy into entertainment and calls it content? The truth that was hidden that year behind We Fly High. That year, while Max B was locked behind the cold walls of the legal system, his story did not stop. It was stripped of its human shape and turned into paperwork. Max B was prosecuted under felony murder, a charge so brutal that it did not require him to be at the scene, did not require him to pull the trigger, did not require him to directly cause a death. As long as the system believed he was the initiating link, all consequences fell on him alone. In that moment, Max B was no longer an artist, no longer a songwriter, no longer the voice that once shook Harlem. He became dangerous on paper. And when the cell door closed, the spotlight outside turned on for someone else. Jim Jones stepped forward at exactly the right time. We Fly High exploded like a wave. From radio to clubs, from cars to stadiums, the hook played on repeat so catchy it turned into a chant. Billboard called Jim's name. The media called Jim's name. Harlem called Jim's name. That was the moment Jim Jones officially crossed from street rap into the tier of mainstream artists with a global hit. In the public eye, it was a familiar hip-hop story. One survivor, one winner, one symbol rising from the streets. And Max B sat in prison, listening to his own music echo everywhere. Not as a romantic metaphor, but as raw reality. A man deprived of freedom, hearing a song marked by his touch, played non-stop outside while he had no control, no share of the benefit, and not even the right to be named. No new contract, no fair income, just time passing, and the feeling of being erased from a story he helped create. From here, suspicions began to take clearer shape. No longer just whispers in the studio. Max B started speaking out. In multiple interviews, including responses given from inside prison, Max insisted that he was a co-writer of We Fly High. According to Max, he did not just give casual input. He directly worked on the hook and melodic ideas, the elements that made the song so catchy and viral. Max said it plainly. It was not a small contribution. It was the soul of the record. Some biographical records and accounts from people who worked during that period also mention that Max B wrote for Jim Jones on multiple tracks. Among them, We Fly High is considered the flagship single, the biggest hit of Jim's career. But for Max, the issue was not about who wrote more or less. It was about credit never given and money that barely existed. Max said, We Fly High was the clearest example of how he was treated in the industry, writing hits for others only to receive crumbs in return. He recalled times when he was paid around $300 per show, while a song he believed he helped create generated millions of dollars elsewhere. For Max B, this was not simply about money. It was about the right to be credited, the right to be acknowledged, and the right to exist in music history under his true role. Every time We Fly High played, it was not an old hit to him. It was a reminder that certain contributions had been erased from the surface of the story, as if they never existed. On the other side, Jim Jones told a completely different story. In 2016, when asked directly whether Max B co-wrote We Fly High, Jim reacted angrily. He denied it outright. According to Jim, Max B never wrote 1 ounce of my music. Not only did he deny this specific case, he claimed that no one had ever written music for him at all. In his frustration, Jim even flipped the narrative, saying that he himself had ghostwritten for others, including names mentioned in the question. That reaction was more than an answer. It was a line drawn very clearly. This story was not allowed to exist. From there, 2 parallel versions continued to exist without ever meeting. On one side was Max B repeatedly stating that he wrote We Fly High, especially the hook, using it as proof that he was exploited and pushed aside once the money started flowing. On the other side was Jim Jones, who denied everything, dismissed it as rumor, and reacted harshly whenever the topic resurfaced. There was no reconciliation, no middle explanation, just 2 voices, one in prison, one under the lights, speaking about the same song from completely opposite positions of power. This contrast is what turned We Fly High into a dangerous blind spot. Not because of the song itself, but because it exposed how the industry operates when one person loses the right to speak. Max B could talk, could explain, could insist, but his position made every word easy to dismiss. Jim Jones could deny, could get angry, could shut the question down, and the system around him was strong enough to do the rest. The truth, if it existed, was trapped between these extremes, neither confirmed nor fully erased. From that moment on, the image of dangerous Max B was reinforced in a very different way. Not through guns, not through direct violence, but through the role he held in the story. A man who knew too much about how a hit record was made. A man who once stood close enough to understand how power moved through studios' contracts and deals never written on paper. And a man who, because he was in prison, could not defend his version of events. In the end, the most uncomfortable question was no longer about who wrote the hook or who created the melody. It was this: in an industry where power decides history, who is truly dangerous? The man sitting in prison labeled by the system and stripped of control over his own story? Or the man standing under the lights earning millions from a song born in the gray zone of silence, where truth can be buried with a single angry denial? Turning the legal tide upside down. 75 years was not just a sentence. In hip-hop, it was an erasing statement. At that moment, Max B was not a rapper past his prime, not a name on the verge of fading out. He was barely in his 20s, at the peak of creative vitality, when voice, emotion, and cultural influence all reached maturity at the same time. A sentence, that long one that realistically exceeds a human lifetime, was no longer simply punishment. It was the system saying this story would have no next chapter. No chance to correct course, no space to grow, only total disappearance. For most of the public back then, the message was crystal clear. Max B was effectively wiped off the map, not erased for a few years, but erased from every future plan of the industry. No next album, no tour, no comeback. No one needed to say it out loud, because the number 75 years did that work on its own. When time is stretched to an irrational length, hope becomes unnecessary. And when Max B disappeared, the wave disappeared with him. Not because melodic street rap lost its audience, but because the person holding its soul was removed from the game. Wave was never a genre with a strict formula. It was not just slower tempos or adding melody to rap. Wave was a feeling, a voice floating between rapping and singing, a collision between church and the block, between fragile hope and harsh reality. Wave was inseparable from Max B himself, from the Harlem history he carried. When he was locked behind bars, Wave lost its central source of energy. Other artists could copy the surface. They could imitate the inflection, the drawn-out vocals, the way street life was delivered through softer melodies. But without Max B, without the person who shaped its original spirit, Wave was quickly seen as a temporary moment. An interesting trend, but not deep enough to last. No one stepped up to defend it. No one had both the street credibility and creative authority to keep leading the way. And in hip-hop, when a current has no one at the helm, it is easily swallowed by whatever sells more easily. in the eyes of the industry, Wave became a risky investment. With no Max B outside to continue the story, no one to build a long-term brand around labels turned away quickly. No press release, no official statement. They simply went silent. And in this industry, silence is often the second sentence. On the streets, the story was even colder. People did not just say Max B was finished. They said Wave was dead. And when a movement is labeled dead, it does not just lose its audience, it loses the right to develop at all. No one wants to bet on something already buried alive by the system. That is why the 75-year sentence did not just crush one man. It crushed an emerging legacy. Max B was taken away, and at the same time, history was rewritten in the most convenient way for those who remained. His contributions were pushed into the background. His influence was dismissed as coincidence, as luck, as a brief moment. Wave, once seen as the future of street melodic rap, was reduced to a footnote in someone else's success story. Not because it was weak, but because its creator no longer had the chance to prove its real staying power. Yet at the very bottom of that ending, a paradox began to form. When Max B was considered gone, Wave did not grow openly, but it did not completely die. It settled quietly, existing in the subconscious of the streets. Young artists who grew up during that period still went back to Max's music, still learned how to stretch melodies, still absorbed that sense of unfinished emotion. And that is why saying the 75-year sentence seemed to kill Wave is not an exaggeration. It is an accurate description of how that moment felt. A current abruptly broken, a voice silenced before it could travel far, a culture forced to move forward without the person who opened the path. The question that hung in the air for many years afterward was not whether Max B was guilty or not. It was whether, if Max B had not been buried alive by a terminal sentence like that, Wave would ever have been considered dead at all, or whether it might have had the chance to become a larger chapter in hip-hop history before being cut short by the power of the system.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.